So, having seen how to add attendees and manage their bookings in Workshop Angel, we're now going to go into the mystical world of defining activities. So, the place where we work with activity definitions is in the Activities main menu tab here. And the place you'll find yourself working the most is in the first option which comes up, which is called Define Activities. This area has the classic layout of allowing you to search for things on the left and seeing details over here on the right. So we can select on any activity and see the what we call the basics details over here on the right hand side. Let's take a walk through how an existing activity is structured, and then we'll take a look at building a new one. So there are various elements and details which describe the entire activity itself. And those different views of that information are visible with these different icons on the entry here for each activity, and also on the menu options on the local menu at the top when we see those details on the right. So let's look at the details then for the yoga retreat that we've been working with. So we'll go into a little bit of detail on the basics tab because this is really important to understand. An activity has both a title, which is your own internal reference, and that usually has some reference to the actual date that it runs, so that when you list it here on the left, if you've got multiple activities with the same name, you know which one you're dealing with. It then has the idea of the location it runs at, and we'll look in a moment at defining locations. And then down here in the next section, we have the two key pieces of information which describe that activity to your clients. So the first thing is what we call the external title, which your clients will see. So that's whatever you want your clients to consider this activity to be called. And then we allow you to describe some text for when the activity actually is, because we know that some of you may be running not just activities on one day or one weekend, but in more complex sequences of events, maybe every evening for 6 weeks or every month for 6 months. So you can describe in words when the activity actually runs. So that's the summary of the basics information. Let's go and look at this description of the location. So because you will probably run many activities at one location, then we give you a place where you can just describe the locations that you work from and then link those to the different activities that you run. So the locations are described here in Describe Locations. So if we click on that, we just have a list of locations on the left without any real search because you probably won't have that many. And then you can click on an individual location and see that it has a name. It has like a geographical area where it runs. And then there's an area where you can describe how to get there and anything your clients need to know specifically about that location, which you can then really easily link into all of your joining instructions types of messages that you send out to your attendees. So if we go back to define activities, that's the kind of big picture of the details about the activity itself. But then each activity has various elements which are part of the activity description. And so we get the idea of being able to go inside an individual activity and see all those different elements. And we do that by clicking on this option here in this Go Inside option. So if we click on that, now the left-hand side is not a list of activities, but it's this specific activity, the yoga retreat, that we've chosen. We can see here now on the left that we've got different sections for these different details or elements of the activity. Let's just walk through those one at a time. So the first thing then are the attendance prices. So if we click on the description for that, then that shows us a listing of the different attendance prices that we've defined. In this case, there's 4. We have the option to add more with the add button over here on the right. And each price then, a little bit like the way we work with the activity, each price we can click on and then see the details of the price appear over here on the right. And prices also have multiple tabs where you can see different aspects of their description. The first tab is around the text and the amount. There's a second tab around where you can manage the availability of that price, both limiting it by dates or limiting it by numbers. And then there's all sorts of options can be set regarding the flexibility you offer with that price. And yeah, how you can allow that to be shown or not shown in different circumstances, and different deposit payments allowable, and payments by installments and things like that. So that's a quick summary of what's available with prices. So if we close that one, the next one then is our 11 standard messages. So if we open that, you'll start to see some names of messages or types of messages that have already been familiar to you from what we've looked at before, but this is where we define their actual content. So we started off with the place booked message when we looked earlier at booking people onto an activity. So if we click on that, we can see over here on the right the actual text of that message for this activity. And so we have an email subject, then we have the email content, and you can see here we've got this text that's in square brackets, and those square brackets access information from the database. So when we say dear first name, the actual message will say dear John or dear Norbert as it's sent out. And there's a whole host of different types of information that can be extracted and placed in an email like this. And this idea of using these little codes in square brackets, these are known as shortcodes. So that's the messages, and you can see the different types here. So the ones we looked at to do with the place booked, joining instructions just before and just after are defined here. Then the payment reminder and the payment due messages. There's other ones to do with payment overdue, if somebody wants a copy of the invoice, and a couple of other messages to do with managing the waiting list. So let's close that. And we also have the ability to define any number of questions to be asked to your attendees. And again, we've seen those when we've booked people onto the yoga retreat. So those are defined in this section called questions per attendee. We've defined 6 here. You have options to change the order of the questions. And if we look at a particular question, for example, the any questions question, we can see here the details of how that's defined. There's the idea of a question having a particular kind of being in a topic group. There's the actual question itself. We can add an explanation. We define what type of response we're expecting, whether it's text or a price or a number. And then various other options which control exactly how that question will be presented and what's required of it in the response by the attendee. So those are the questions. There are then various advanced options. You can define your own custom messages. You can define prices for optional extras. So we've seen that with the yoga retreat, with the vegan meals and the pescatarian meals. And you can also define prices for what we call resources. And that's where we've defined our individual rooms available, for example, the single rooms and the twin rooms. And those are actually declared to be the individual rooms which we know we have available in our accommodation. So that is the summary of the detail that you find when you go inside an activity. Let's step out. So to go back to the list of activities, we click on the exit button here, and that takes us back to our activity list. In the second part of this lesson, we're going to take a look at creating a new activity. So we click here on Add New Activity, and let's create an activity which is called Yoga for Beginners. So here, this is our internal title. So we'll probably want to put some reference to the date. So let's say that this is going to run in July 2022. So we can put the start date in here. So we'll make it the weekend of starting on Saturday the 4th. Oh, that's June. Oops, Saturday the 4th of, that's Saturday the 2nd of July. And the last day the activity will run, we will make Sunday the 3rd of July. And then we click Create Activity, and the activity is then created for us. So it's now listed here on the left, and it's taken us by default to the basics view over here. And this is where we want to add a few more of the most basic details so that we have a starting point for working then with the other details inside. So we want to choose an activity location. So let's make that at this demo location we've got called Waterworks Barn. And we want a title now that will be seen by the clients. So let's make that Yoga for Beginners. And then we can give it a specific description of when it is. So let's say it is on the weekend of, what was it, 2nd and 3rd of July 2022. And we'll save those details. If we now go inside the activity, we can see that by default we're given just one attendance price of £100 or 100 of whatever your local currency is. So we can go in and optionally add more prices and work with the details of those. It automatically has the 11 standard messages, and if we want to edit some of the details of what they say for this specific activity, we can do that. We can also go in and add various questions. We won't do any more of that now. What we'll do now is just show you very briefly how you will go through testing that this activity is looking okay to your clients. So you would add all those details, and then you would want to actually add one or two test attendees to the activity to see how the booking form actually looks. So you can do that either here with the add an attendee button, or you can go into bookings and add the attendee from there. So let's do it from here. So that's now going to bring us up into the booking form, which comes up in another tab. We can add absolutely any email address we want here, because emails are not actually sent out in when we're working in test mode. We do want to make sure we're working in test mode at this point, and we are. The booking form just show that we're in test mode here. So let's make up an email address, something like, let's say, donald@duck.com. And we start the booking process, so we'll give a first name of Donald Duck. We'll choose the entry price, so there is only one entry price right now, but if you made a few options available, then those would appear along with the details that you might have defined for the explanation. If there were questions you defined, you could see how those looked here. And then you can go on to complete the booking. So it shows us the familiar summary of the booking. We haven't at this point set any option to pay a deposit, so this is just allowing payment at the time. So as we've seen before, we can select this test card number, paste it in here, add some random credit card information, click press now, and that will perform our booking. And we can then go back to Workshop Angel, and if we go to bookings, we can see now that Donald Duck's been added, and in the payments he's paid his £100. So your process for developing a new activity would be to build the prices, the questions, and then go and add one or two test attendees, make sure the booking form looks okay before you then take it live. And we'll be discussing that process of taking it live in a couple of lessons' time. So we hope that lesson was useful for you. We've seen both how activities are structured by looking at the retreat activity, and now we've also seen how to create a new activity and go through the process of testing that that's looking okay. In the next lesson, we're going to look at how to manage contacts, and then the final lesson of this Getting Started tutorial series will be about working with your settings and how you actually go live with your activities.